Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always, told out of Voice of Radio. So today, I want to show you a weird spread deck. I bet it's the best way I can describe it. It's got lots of cards that spread damage around, and it's kind of all over the place, and it's a weird kind of, let's play all this together kind of deck. But it works, and it's won a tournament. And I would say I'm kind of into it, but that would be a misnomer. I am very into it. Now, if we have to ask for a main Pokemon here, Garchomp and Giratina. Let's go Garchomp and Giratina, alright? That is the biggest Pokemon. That is, if we're looking for a main attacker, I think Garchomp and Giratina is probably the main one. And it's a weird thing, but we're actually using it as much for the first attack as anything else. This attack does 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, don't get me wrong, we've also got Calamitous Slash here, 160 damage, but if there's any damage counters on it already, you do 240. But we're going to need quite a few extra damage. Because if you're against something like Reshiram and Zekrom, well, they got 270, you're going to need 30 damage on them. But as we get into the Sword and Shield meta that Japan is in at the moment, and we get into stuff like Snorlax V Max with 340 HP, then all of a sudden we're actually looking to put 100 damage on before we can get a KO with Calamitous Slash. That's a lot, ladies and gentlemen. So the whole point of this deck here is right. Let's try and get all that damage on. Now, as a quick side note, we do have GG the End GX, and we do have Fighting Energy, right? And we do have Aurora Energy. It's that new special energy that is any energy, but you've got to discard a card from your hand to play it. So you can use GG the End. You need 2 Psychic, 4 Fighting, and you discard 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Whereas if you've just got 2 Psychic, 1 Fighting, you discard 1 of your opponent's Pokemon and all cards attached to it. I suppose if they've only got 1 Pokemon in play, this will win you the game, so there is something. And then we just play a whole bunch of Pokemon that are there to spread damage. So we've got that new Galarian Zigzagoon, the one that's got the same ability as the old Crobat G. When you play it to the bench, you get to drop 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. That'll do. We've got the Wheezing that came around in Cosmic Eclipse. No coughing, just the wheezing. Because when you discard it from your hand using Roxy, you put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. And yes, obviously you need to play Roxy here, but Roxy's a good card. You discard up to 2 Pokemon from your hand, and you draw 3 cards for each card you discarded using Roxy. So use Roxy, discard a couple of Wheezing, put 1 damage on each of your opponent's Pokemon twice. That sounds like fun. We've obviously got a copy of Giratina in here. Now this is actually just a nice non-GX attacker. 3 energy, 130 damage, gives up a single prize when KO'd. It's actually really good for that. But it's got the ability Dimension Door. If it ends up in the discard, you can put it from the discard onto your bench, and then put 1 damage counter on each of 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So that works quite nicely. But we do need some ways to spread a little bit more damage than that, and we have a couple of ways to spread a little bit more damage than that. First of all, we've got that Blacephalon, the second Blacephalon that came out. It's a great Blacephalon. Now, it actually came around in Cosmic Eclipse, made its way in as a pre-release promo as well, which was quite cool. And for 1 Psychic, 1 Colorless Energy, you put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. But if your opponent has exactly 3 prize cards remaining, you drop 12 damage counters instead. Now, firstly, dropping 12 damage counters is pretty gosh darned awesome. Secondly, if your opponent is playing Mew, they'll be stopping all the damage you do to the bench, but they won't be stopping this. As a fun side note, we also play Mew, and we play it to protect our bench, but don't sleep on the fact that for 1 Colorless Energy, Mew can drop 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. So Mew can get a bit of that going on as well, which is rather wonderful. And then we've got Cramorant V. Now, Cramorant V for 1 colourless energy does allow you to search your deck for any 2 cards and put them into your hand. It's fine, but the far better attack here is 3 colourless energy, discard all energy attached to Cramorant V, and then you get to do 160 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. It will instantly KO a Dedenne or a Jirachi if your opponent's playing either of those cards, but it's also very much worth noting here that, well, you can finish off other Pokemon. It doesn't have to be a Dedenne or a Jirachi. You're spreading, in theory, so much damage here that you should be able to get some big KOs on some bigger Pokemon, and that's kind of cool. Now, we also see here Alolan Sandslash GX. A Pokemon that we have seen Alolan Sandslash GX popping up in some decks, but it's not one we see all that often. Now, it's got a nice little ability. If it's active and damaged by an opponent's attack, put 3 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. And for 1 water, 2 colourless, you can do 120. But the attack it's really here for is Needle Storm GX. This attack does 100 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon that have any damage counters on them. Well, you're spreading a lot of damage around anyway. This comes in and lets you do 100 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon, essentially. This is your GX attack of choice here, and it's kind of ridiculously awesome. Now, because of a bunch of stage 1s, we are playing Ditto Prism Star. Because it's a deck, we are playing Dedenne GX, which is quite nice for just, discard your hand, draw 6 cards. It gets you set up in the early game. And of course, we need a bunch of energy. We're playing a 3/3 Malamar line. This has to be a Malamar deck. I've just shown you all the other Pokemon in the deck that aren't Malamar, and you'll notice we're not playing many single energy attackers here. We need a bunch of energy, and that's where Malamar comes in. And I should add here, we do actually have a thin line of the new Silvally GX. It's got a nice GX attack. It gets an instant KO on any Ultra Beast, which might come in handy, but generally speaking here, it is for the ability that lets you draw until you got 5 cards in your hand. It's a nice draw engine. And we've got one of them there, a Mimikyu. It's there for the copycat attack. It really is as simple as that. You get to copy any attack your opponent used on the previous turn, just so long as it was not a GX attack. You can draw 2 cards with the first attack, but if your opponent uses a good attack, Mimikyu's going to copy it. Now, in terms of the energy, it does get a little bit complicated. Obviously, our main goal here is playing around with Psychic Energy, because that's what we're using for Malamar. But then we also see a little bit of Water Energy, so that we can use Alolan Sandslash's GX attack. And then a little bit of Fighting Energy, so that we can use the bigger attack on Garchomp and Giratina. And then the aforementioned Aurora Energy, which could be Psychic, or Water, or Fighting. Yeah, it's a little bit weird. Now, in terms of the trainer line here, we already mentioned Roxy. Roxy's pretty big. But we're also playing Rosa here. You've got an awful lot of single prize Pokemon. And when you have a Pokemon KO'd, the next turn you play Rosa, you search your deck for a Pokemon, a trainer card, and a basic energy. Well, you're playing a bunch of 1 or 2 of basic energy, one-offs really, and you're playing a bunch of one-off Pokemon. It can be quite difficult to find the right Pokemon with the right energy at the right time. I mean, you might really need Alolan Sandslash, and you might have your Malamar, but you need your Alolan Sandslash and the Water Energy right now. You're only playing 1 of each. That's where something like Rosa comes in so handy. But it also explains why we play so much Pokemon Search. We play a full 4 copies of Quick Ball. Lets you search your basic Pokemon. It's kind of important. We play a full 4 copies of Pokemon Communication. Lets you swap a Pokemon in your hand for a Pokemon in your deck. Hopefully swap a Pokemon you don't want for a Pokemon you do want. And this is really important here because you're playing a whole bunch of Pokemon anyway, and like I said, you've got a bunch of one-offs and Pokemon in there for specific matchups, etc. You really do need to be able to find the right one at the right time. But you're also playing a bunch of Dragon and Psychic Pokemon, so obviously we're also playing Mysterious Treasure, which lets you search out your Psychic and Dragon Pokemon. Elsewhere, our stadium of choice is Viridian Forest. Lets you search out Basic Energy, which we've said can be very important. We've got a couple copies of Crushing Hammer. It slows your opponent down a tiny bit by discarding an energy from one of their Pokemon if you can flip a heads. But the thing is, you're spreading around a whole bunch of damage, so if you can just spread around some damage, oftentimes 1 or 2 turns can take a loss into a win. And Crushing Hammer can buy you 1 or 2 turns, so it's actually a really nice play in this deck. We've got U-Turn board to help you retreating, given that you've got a whole bunch of single retreat Pokemon here. We've got Reset Stamp, it's a one-of in every deck, your opponent takes a big lead. Or even if the game is tied, to be honest, if they've not got many prizes left, use it to put them down to a small hand. We've got Switch to also help you switch your Pokemon round, get the right one in the active. We've got Fishing Rod to recover Pokemon and Basic Energy. That's pretty important. And that's it. That's the deck. Oh, no, wait, sorry. We've got 1 copy of Guzma and Hala. It lets you search out essentially a Stadium, a tool, and a Special Energy. Well, you ain't playing no tools, but it'll get you your Viridian Forest, which gets you Basic Energy, and it will get your Aurora Energy. Really, this is just a good, guaranteed way to search out the energy that you need, and that's pretty gosh darned important. Although it is worth noting that Guzma and Hala does make you discard a couple cards from your hand to search out the Special Energy, and then Aurora Energy lets you discard, or makes you discard, another card from your hand in order to play it. So do please bear in mind that it's actually kind of awkward to use Guzma and Hala to find Aurora Energy. I love this deck. I really love this deck. It's awkward, it's confusing, it's all over the place, but I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't have it any other way. A weird deck, but one that I am totally into. But I would like to know how into it you are. So let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where we talk about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are still pretty gosh darned awesome. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.